We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's special show, we're talking the Kamala Harris coronation and Joe Biden's attempt to reform the Supreme Court with just 6 months to go of his presidency. Now, are both of these events more stage-managed than they are political reality? That's what we'll be finding out today. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio American Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. We're very fortunate to have with us today long-time host of this here radio show and Liberty Nation's senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donner, who joins us to discuss the Kamala Harris coronation. Thanks for being here, Tim.
Always a pleasure, Mark, of course.
So, Tim, here we are. Kamala Harris has just passed the day of recording, has just essentially been declared the winner of the Democratic Party nomination because there were no other contenders. Now, Tim, I'm sure you're familiar with the term a Hobson's choice. And for those listeners who aren't, it's thought to relate to a 16th century stable livery owner who would tell customers, you can have any horse that you like as long as it's the one closest to the door. Or if we could go with a Henry Ford one, if we prefer.
Yes.
You know, it's you can have it in any color you want, as long as it's black. It really wasn't any choice at all, was it, Tim?
Well, let's think back to the major talking point of Joe Biden when he was still the candidate. It was the threat to democracy. It was that our democratic republic is so shaky that if we elect Donald Trump again, our entire political system will collapse under the weight of an authoritarian. Right? This was the entirety of the Biden campaign because he couldn't run on the economy or inflation or crime or, God forbid, the border, nor on two foreign wars, ground wars that commenced under his watch. He couldn't do any of that. So the entire basis of his campaign was to scare people about Donald Trump because of democracy. Well, let's look at what they've done. Democrats, or shall we say those who are allies of Joe Biden, laid 91 criminal charges on Donald Trump, tried to send him to jail, tried to bankrupt him, tried to take him off the ballot. And now they took their own candidate off the ballot and decided that a woman who had never received a single vote, by the way, in 2024 or 2020, when she ran her own face plant of a presidential campaign, suddenly now she's anointed as the savior of the Democratic Party. I think at a minimum, Mark, they're going to need to drop this whole threat to democracy thing when Democratic voters were basically given one choice in the primaries and then told, oh, wait, never mind, we'll give you this one other choice. And they're even giving them those choices. In other words, the delegates basically moved en masse to Kamala Harris the day after Biden dropped out. So this is a lot of things, Mark, but it's not democracy.
Yeah, very true, Tim. I think it's really important to understand the process by which Joe Biden first got those delegates, and then the process by which essentially any other potential candidates were blocked out. But I would like to correct you on something, if I may, Tim. You said that Kamala Harris didn't get a single vote during 2020.
I'm sorry,
2020
she
campaign.
got 834, you're correct.
844, yeah.
She got 0 delegates. Okay.
0 delegates.
All right, thanks for the correction.
You're very welcome, yes. Out of the entire country who could have voted in a primary, she got 844 votes across the entire.
Well, of course.
We shouldn't take those away from her.
Well, what they're doing now is trying to purge, trying to do a Stalinist-like purge on her radical history, on the fact that she was voted by a neutral cite as the single most liberal senator out of 100 in 2019. They're trying to have us
That does
forget
tell
about the
you
fact.
that does tell you something when Bernie Sanders was on that list.
And apparently, Bernie was pretty upset that
Mm.
he didn't finish first, since he's the definitive progressive. But what that says is there's sort of a conundrum with Kamala Harris, because on the one hand, she seems like a person without any fixed political values. On the other hand, she's someone who has bought into every single progressive lunacy idea, to make a word, lunatic idea, from 2020 onward. She wants to ban fracking, wants 70 to 80% tax rates for the wealthy. The list goes so far on. She wants to, she said she would think about abolishing ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. She thought that adding more police officers to stop crime is wrong-headed. She completely supported the defund police movement. She raised money on behalf of some of the most violent rioters during that summer of hell
She
of 2020
encouraged
after
others
George Floyd.
to donate
She
to.
did. She
Yeah.
tweeted out for the Minnesota fund that was dedicated to bailing out these violent rioters. So, I mean, the history is so long and so disturbing, so left wing from beginning to end. You say to yourself, well, I guess she's a dyed in the wool progressive. So, I mean, she's a dyed in the wool politician who's decided to pitch her tent on the far left. She decided to do that in 2020, and that will come back to haunt her terribly during this 2024 campaign. Because if you remember the radical environment from 2020, where America is a racist country and we need to defund the police and all that insanity that went on that year, that's now become essentially the Democratic Party position on most things, including Kamala Harris, who goes along for the ride on every progressive idea du jour for toppling the current constitutional system.
Yes. Yeah, it's like a reed blowing in the wind to whichever way the power emanates. I think is a good way to look at it. Now, let's go back to the the primary that never was. So, because of Joe Biden's withdrawal, there was the Democratic National Committee set up new rules to allow other Democrats to put their name forward and be considered for the nomination, which sounds like a very democratic way of doing things. But I did an article on this on the page of libertynation.com where I examined 3 reasons why that was never going to allow any other candidate to come forward. Because the criteria here was that they had to have, anybody who wanted their name put forward had to have 300 delegates out of the almost 4,000, with no more than 50 from each of 6 states. So that meant that they not only had to get 50 delegates or more from their state, but they had to get at least 50 delegates from 5 other states. Now, the issue there is there's only 2 national politicians who have a campaign in place all over the country. That was Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Now, of course, Harris inherited the campaign system and all those offices from Joe Biden when he stepped down and endorsed her, stepped down from the competition and endorsed her. So essentially, anybody who wanted to put their name forward had 10 days to set up a ground game in 5 other states, aside from the one they're in, reach out to delegates, convince those delegates to go against the biggest wishes of all their party leaders and support somebody else. That was number one. Number two, they don't even know if they can get donors. They don't know if they have a functioning campaign system in place with 10 days to go. And of course, who wants to upset the apple cart and risk handing the win to Donald Trump? So for these reasons, it seems to me that it was an impossible task for anybody, no matter how popular they are with actual Democrat or potential Democrat voters. What's your take?
Well, I think that Joe Biden upset the entire apple cart when he decided to go back on his pledge to be a transitional figure. I think what they had in mind all along, Mark, was that Kamala Harris would join Joe Biden in 2020, put the Black woman on, or woman of color, more precisely, on the ticket to increase the appeal of a ticket with an old white man on it. And that worked. But I think that was the extent to which they counted on Kamala Harris going forward. I think the idea was that Biden would bow out gracefully as a candidate after a couple of years, probably after the 2022 midterms, and then Kamala would be given a chance along with the actually promising Democratic candidates, perhaps Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer, Andy Beshear,
Josh
Shapiro. They have a list of, pretty successful politicians in mixed or even blue states. So they could have, and I think they wanted the idea that Biden would say, okay, I'm not going to run again. And then they'd open the primary and Kamala would have a chance along with everyone else. But when he decided, Biden, to run again, that upset the entire apple cart, because now they had to support him, because a primary would tear the Democratic Party apart. So they pushed everyone else out and said it's Biden or bust. And when they did that, they were left with no choice but to pick Kamala Harris when he dropped out, because with the instability that they were already demonstrating, to throw it open to some wild 30-day, extreme rushed primary would just have given voters the sense that these people don't know what they're doing. Not that they do now, but that would have been an advertisement for chaos.
Not that I've ever seen the show, but I hear there's something called 90 Day Fiance. This was a 10-day presidential candidate. We'll be back with Tim after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.